Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is the greatest video game ever made. There you go, review over. Haven't played it? Play it. Don't have a PlayStation 5? Understandable, times are hard. But hey, there's a full commentary playthrough on my channel. Need a review? Well, I got you. You might be thinking, Lofter, you've only finished the first half of the game. How can you make such a declarative statement? Well, my dear viewer, it's because at the point that I'm at in the game, it's already fulfilling. The game could end right now, hit me with a big ol' "to be continued." And I would say, yeah, that's fair, that was enough game. We are really going to need a lot of deep diving here because there's a lot of misconceptions about what the Final Fantasy Remake trilogy is and is not, so sit back, relax, and hit that subscribe button for more retro and modern gaming content and reviews. Or I don't know, lean forward and finish your pot of coffee. Let's start with the biggest thing I've personally seen about this new trilogy. Is Final Fantasy VII Remake a cash grab? Well, the answer is, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. No, seriously, Remake costs like $144 million to make. You know what a cash grab looks like? Spitting out the same game with higher resolution graphics and adding nothing else, like the Pixel remakes. Bit of a tangent here, but some of the original Final Fantasy games did need an update. Final Fantasies 1, 2, 3, and 5 come to mind, as the Pixel remakes are easily the definitive versions of those games. But Final Fantasy VI was already a perfect game and just needed bug fixes. The original's graphics and sound are both superior to every version of that game that's come out. But 4 and 6 did not need to be remade or remastered and sold separately. They are already in a near perfect state on multiple platforms. Enix is just tired of you pirating them and wanted new money for their old game. That is a cash grab. Now don't misunderstand me from either direction. I am a Enix fanboy. I played the original Final Fantasy VII on release. Final Fantasy VI is, or possibly was, my favorite game of all time. Chrono Trigger should be in the Louvre, where you can just sit and watch Wexel speedrun the game as an exhibit. I am unquestionably a fanboy. I also think that everything past Final Fantasy X is mediocre at best, and hot garbage at worst. Except for Final Fantasy XIV, I give it a lot of leeway since it's basically its own thing. Anyways, point is, while I love Square Enix a bit, I am also fully capable of being critical with them. Back to the topic at hand, hiring dozens of voice actors, composing an entirely new and updated soundtrack, pushing Unreal Engine 4 to its absolute limit, inventing a new combat system, and rewriting your entire story is not a cash grab. It is the opposite of a cash grab, honestly. It's a cash sink. And the amount of people who said all they had to do was make Final Fantasy VII again and update the graphics are absolutely lying to themselves, because if they had done that, they would still be calling it a lazy cash grab. There is no pleasing those people. At any rate, the simple answer is it's not a cash grab. It's a labor of love that people have poured their hearts into to give the absolute best product they could to do the original justice. Lastly, I will say if you're one of those, I'll just wait until the full game is out, people. Good luck. If you can survive another 4 years, then good on you. I mean that figuratively and literally. If the world ended this year, I'd be hella pissed I didn't play Rebirth. And also, dodging spoilers for 4 years, like, you get a year and a half, you're allowed to be mad here about spoilers. Once the game comes out on PC and Xbox, I'm giving y'all 6 months to get your act together before I stop worrying about spoilers. There's gotta be a statute of limitations on this stuff. But that's enough on that topic, and if you are choosing to wait the full 12 years for the entire trilogy to be out to play or watch it, that's on you. Second question, does Final Fantasy VII Remake change the series? This is a complicated question at this juncture for me because on one hand, yes, 1000%, this is not a one-for-one remake with the original. Without going too deep into spoiler territory, it's quite possibly flips the entire script and will literally rewrite the franchise. The problem is we don't know until it's over if they're going to go for a destiny cannot be defined or a destiny can be rewritten. Even if Rebirth ends in a certain way, and from what I can tell the game ends in the City of the Ancients, that doesn't mean we can't and won't change. That doesn't mean that it can't and won't be changed in the third game. There's a lot going on here between time travel shenanigans and memory transfers and possibly multiverses. But what I can tell you is that the series is not going to play out the way you remembered it. The first game alone, Remake, is a 30 to 50 hour game with tons of new characters, story, and dialogue. Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge get more screen time, Kyrie exists, the Wall Street Trio make repeat appearances, there's musical numbers and new bosses, and it's just wonderful. That's not to say there isn't fluff. It's hella fluffed out. It's fluffed like a man named Raw Meat Stick before his debut shoot. but it's mostly good fluff. Some sections do draw out way too long, such as the trip back to Sector 7 after the Pillar incident, but overall, Remake adds amazing things to an already fairly deep and rich lore. Retroactively, I do give Remake an 8 out of 10. It's not perfect, but it's hella fun, especially once you take into account the combat, which I will talk about in more detail later. At the end of the day, though, all the media past Final Fantasy VII did not exist before Final Fantasy VII, and the way they have incorporated every single facet of the Final Fantasy VII franchise into the Remake trilogy, even Dirge of Cerberus, is phenomenal and honestly needed just to patch up some plot holes. We aren't even going to talk about the stuff involving Zack because that's an entire video on its own. Like, what the hell is that Rebirth opening, Squeenix? You literally made entire sections of the game I cannot talk about because it's so good and confusing that I don't want to spoil people into Pikachu faces who understandably can't play it just yet. The fact remains, though, that at this juncture, both where I am in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and the series as a whole, the game could go on hundreds of directions and it's really exciting. Review time! Graphics 10 out of 10. Moving on. No, seriously, it's 2024. Do we even need to talk about graphics anymore? Games are so realistic these days that a lot of the time we're more impressed by pixel graphics than realistic graphics. The game's beautiful. Sound, also 10 out of 10. Same as before, are we still judging sound design? Outside of low-budget indie games, games these days have beautifully composed soundtracks that will melt your heart whether their chiptunes are composed by a masterful orchestra. I don't even think gamers listen to traditional music on the radio anymore. We have like a billion hours worth of music that sets our hearts on fire. Who needs Taylor Swift when you have the Persona 3 Reloaded OST? That said, the music in the game is fire. I wish I could play some of them for you, but the copyright claims are strong with this one. There's new music, old music, remixed music, everything has its own theme song. If nothing else, give the OST a listen. You will not be disappointed. I'm going to do gameplay before stories. At first glance, you mash square and win. Sometimes you press triangle and you heal a lot. The thing is, the combat system in Rebirth at first glance is very similar to Remake, and on a surface level that makes sense. And you can actually play Rebirth in the same way as Remake. You can just use your normal attacks and discharge your ATB meter whenever you want and drop all your summons when they're up and overall have a good time. But that's a very basic versions of the gameplay. Let's go a little bit deeper. So as I mentioned, you have your square attack, which is your normal attack, and every character has different ranges and attack speeds as well as approaches. Triangles typically are unique attack or ability. For Red 13 it activates its Vengeance mode. For Cloud you change stances and get a much slower walk speed but much higher attack speed and damage that leaves you mostly stationary. Tifa gets some big attacks that she can beef up using her ATB, and Barrett has a big shot that has a cooldown which can be shortened by pressing the button again after expending any ability, including emptying his ammo on a normal attack. And Yuffie throws her shuriken, which turns her normal attacks into ranged magical attacks, or she can press triangle again to teleport to the enemy she hit with it and start an airborne melee attack cycle. Lastly, Aerith teleports to wherever her fairy is, which she gets by charging her basic attack, and I have yet to actually find a use for that. All in all, even on a fundamental 2-button level, everyone plays differently. As combat progresses and you land attacks, dodges, block attacks, and so forth, you gain ATB meter, which you can spend on spells, items, or weapons. Spells are the same as ever. Fire, lightning, cure, haste, you know the drill. The unique attacks, however, require some level of strategy to know when and what to use. For instance, Cloud and Tifa both have charging attacks that do high amounts of stagger damage. These are great for enemies who don't have elemental weaknesses and only get pressured or staggered by their own actions. However, for enemies that do have elemental weaknesses, you will want to stick to spells and attacks that fall in line with those. Elemental spells work great here, but that's not your only tool. Cloud, for instance, fairly early learns a sword attack that costs 0 MP and does both fire and lightning damage. Yuffie, in contrast, can turn her normal attacks into any element except poison, allowing her to constantly pepper her enemies with their elemental weakness. Aerith has an insane magic stat and should just be using magic, as she can get about as much mileage from a tier 1 elemental spell as Cloud can get from several of his fancy elemental attacks. Now then, there is another mechanic called folios. Think of them like skill trees. There is your basic stuff in there like 200 hit points, or more complex things like increased damage under X conditions. Then there are 0 MP magic attacks that carry their elements and have additional effects, such as the wind version sucking enemies into melee range. Lastly, there are synergy attacks and abilities. These in truth are your meat and potatoes. Every character has 2 synergy abilities with every other character. Cloud plus Tifa, Barret plus Red 13, and all the other possible combinations. These by themselves can already be insanely powerful and do not require magic points or ATB. Cloud and Aerith, and Cloud and Yuffie, for instance, give a charged up magical sword attack that not only does heavy magic damage, but also creates a straight line shockwave that can wipe most normal enemies out in a single swing, provided they line up for you to charge it up. Cloud and Red 13, on the other hand, gives you some quick fire range magical attacks that give them a way to hit otherwise unreachable targets. Aerith, meanwhile, has a whole lot of stuff that makes Barret and Cloud takes hits for her. Keep in mind that these abilities do build ATB and they also build synergy. Once you've built up enough synergy resources, you can use a full synergy attack, and again, each character has differing abilities. A basic one that many combinations have is the ability to go from 2 bars of ATB to 3 bars of ATB, allowing you to stock more meter before you have to worry about dumping them. There are also insanely cool attacks you can do that have cinematics that rival, if not obliterate, limit breaks. These attacks also have bonus effects such as increasing your limit meter, reducing your MP cost to 0 for a short time, and a host of other effects. Synergy abilities is where you'll be spending most of your button uses, as bosses tend to get staggered more easily by them and they're free to use outside of needing your companion free and in your party. Obviously, you can't use them if you only have one party member, or the party member you want to synergize with is KO'd or asleep. So, the main combat loop is using the appropriate offensive and defensive synergy abilities so that you can build up for synergy attacks while peppering in ATB and limit breaks where able. What you end up with is this dynamic looking combat system that's super innovative and fun to watch. Notice I didn't say intuitive? Here's the problem with this system. For one, it goes against everything you know about RPGs. Special attacks are for special occasions. It's very hard to get used to these fancy special attacks in regular combat, especially at first. Your instinct is to use your square and triangle attacks to build up ATB, then use your unique weapon attacks. It actually takes some mental fortitude to break this habit, and even as far as the gold saucer, I still forget sometimes. The second problem is the button layout, which cannot be changed, and there's actually 2 parts to this. The first is where your trigger skills are mapped. R1 is guard, and while guarding you can select a synergy ability. L1 brings up your shortcut menu from your unique attacks. As a gamer more seasoned than a plate of chicken from KFC, every muscle in my body wants R1 to be for my unique attacks. On a logical level, I get it. R1 is guard, and while guarding you call out attacks to your allies. It makes sense. But on a fundamental gameplay level, it just confuses my hands. I cannot tell you how many times I've been mashing for a synergy ability only to notice 5 seconds later that I'm holding L1 instead of R1, and since I have no ATB, nothing is happening. It's so frustrating and completely user error, yet it's a habit I cannot seem to break. The other problem is the layout of the quick menu buttons. There's a visual indicator of what you want to use, especially if you don't have your 4 quick buttons memorized yet. I mentioned your unique attacks, and while you can slow down time and access your menu at any time, you can also hold down L1 to gain access to any 4 attacks of your choosing that are then mapped to the face buttons. The problem here is at the order they're listed. From top to bottom, they are square, triangle, X, circle. What kind of insanity caused this? Why is it not triangle, square, circle, X, or triangle, circle, X, square? You know, clockwise or counterclockwise, with the top one being the top button. Why is the top command the left button on my face buttons, and why does it not run clockwise or counterclockwise? It makes 0 sense, and again, while I do understand this once again as a user error, it's such a baffling choice. And I've used my second ability so many times trying to use my top ability by pressing triangle, wasting my ATB and in some cases healing enemies to absorb specific elements that I have attached to that button. These 2 things are the only dings I give the game, and it's nowhere near enough to actually damage it. It's just really frustrating for me. Button configuration aside, the combat is incredibly clean. The cinematics mid-combat make the battles feel dynamic, the playfield changes during boss battles, as do boss mechanics and attacks. Character banner is on point and non-intrusive, and it's just a great experience that once mastered can offer tons of fun both in terms of gameplay and a feast for your senses. Now for non-combat related gameplay, Final Fantasy VII is known for more than just its incredibly deep story and combat. It also has hella minigames, and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth delivers in spades upon spades. There is so much variety and it's never overly intrusive, but even if you found it to be so, they are mostly entirely skippable. There's everything you wanted, like For Condor and the boxing game from Gold Saucer, to things you didn't know you wanted, like Queen's Blood, which is a card game that is a heavy contender with Triple Triad, and Leapfrog, which is Fall Guys but with frogs. There's tons of side quests and minigames just in the first couple of sections of the game, and that's long before you get to Gold Saucer, where there are even more minigames, all with wonderful rewards and incentives as well as just being fun to play. One of the first ones I encountered was a freaking space shooter, and it was hella fun. The best part is none of these are overly difficult, and there always seems to be an opt-out and a retry, so you don't miss out on rewards. Even the legendary Parade minigame is back, using the system from the Honeybee Inn from Remake. And if you want to strive for perfection, you can always back out and retry to get the best score. Long gone are the going in blind days of Final Fantasy IX's play scene or the Parade from Final Fantasy VII Classic. It's the future, baby, where you don't lose 45 minutes of gameplay to one blind QTE event or just live with whatever level of OCD you have. There are even stories tied to some of these minigames. Queen's Blood has its own Yu-Gi-Oh-esque subplot going on that I'm fascinated by, and what the hell is Gilgamesh even doing? Beyond minigames, there's standard open world styled exploration. You have a huge zone with Breath of the Wild style towers to move away the fog of war and show you other points of interest, while Chadley eggs you on to do everything around. It's not just meaningless exploration either. In addition to finding crafting recipes and ingredients, yeah, it has crafting, and random materia and gear throughout the land, you also acquire completion points for a given zone which you can trade into Chadley for fun. Unique materia such as fire and ice materia, which gives you access to both fire and ice materia for the cost of one slot, reducing needed slots on one character and allowing Aerith to basically easily have every spell in the game pretty quickly. Side quests range from escort missions, which, while usually a curse in gaming, is amazing in this case. The big one that stands out to me is escorting the good boy Salmon across the map while a delightful dog-based pop song plays and Barrett and Cloud discuss Marlene's future. There are also Chocobo Hot Cold minigames similar to Final Fantasy IX, notorious monsters to hunt down like in Final Fantasy XII, Moogles make a tangible comeback in the form of another minigame plus a shop you can spend your Moogle medals at, and a whole lot more. Every region also has a chocobo, which can change how you move around the area. For instance, in Junon, you get a black chocobo, which can climb vertical walls and adds another layer of verticality to your exploration. Even beyond all of that, several characters such as Kyrie from Remake return and have their own entire side stories that progress as you complete their side missions and move forward in the story. There are so many things to do, and just when you feel like you're ready to move on with the story, you're hit with a huge story-rich dungeon with fun puzzles and challenges to keep you invested, and go on just long enough to refresh you for the next open world section to enamor you all over again. It is truly pacing perfection. Overall, you will have just as much fun out of combat as in combat, and most gamers will strive to 100% complete every area, perhaps even without realizing they're doing it. But even if you don't, that's fine. If you feel like you're done, you can always move on and come back later, or just leave that section of the game behind entirely. For the story, where do I even begin? If you've played Final Fantasy VII Classic, you know the cliff notes of the story. You know the bare bones basics and are left with plenty of things you probably just accepted without questioning it. For instance, why was Hojo on the beach at Costa del Sol? He doesn't seem like the kind of guy to take a beach vacation after all. Rebirth answers that. What happened to Johnny? Rebirth answers that. Is Yuffie a Naruto? We got you covered there too. The amount of extra detail and design that went into this game is staggering. They took a fairly vague story that, let's be real, you needed a Wikipedia page and a YouTube video to fully comprehend, and turned it into this master-crafted story that both remains firmly grounded in its roots but isn't afraid to shoot for the stars. I mentioned Honeybee Inn previously. Let's just say they aren't afraid to try to recreate that magic. And oh boy did they succeed, let me tell you what. All the while, the main story plays out mostly as you remembered on a surface level, with vast differences in Sephiroth's behavior and integration. I can safely say that despite being halfway through the story of Rebirth, I couldn't tell you what's going to happen in upcoming parts of the game, much less by the time the final game comes out what's going on there. There's just enough differences to keep you engaged and wondering as a fan of the old game, while fans of the new game get full experience of Final Fantasy VII Classic with all the added flair. It's bananas. The writers honestly outdid themselves here, and if I could go deeper into it, I would, but I want to avoid spoilers. If you want to see a video of me doing a deep dive into the plot of this and Remake, let me know down in the comments below. Overall, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a mastercraft game without equal. I honestly do not see how it can be topped by any other game, past or future. It is perfection in a bottle, a labor of love that can only come from the heart. Truly, the teams working on this game not only are top tier creators in their craft, but have a passion for the original game and characters that can only be described as breathtaking. One day I too hope to love something as much as they love their game. With music that will be on your playlist for years, gameplay that is both dynamic and versatile, endless amounts of lore to uncover that will enrich the entire world you fell in love with 30 years ago, and plenty of graphics. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a game you will fall in love with no matter if you're new to the franchise or reuniting with an old friend. I can't score this game. 10 out of 10 is not enough. Gold medals aren't enough. This game gets a platinum, and unless it severely falls off at the back half, it will become my new favorite game of all time. If something does happen and the game does fall off, I will post a follow-up review, of course, but as it stands, I really don't see that changing. Thanks for watching. I really truly appreciate it. If you don't mind liking and subscribing, I plan on putting out much more content, and hey, there's always old stuff to go check out. And as always, I will see you in the next one. Deuces, dummies.